What's going on, guys? Rusty here with GritShift. Today I'm going to be going over quick kind of tips and tricks and overall install process and a little bit about the 85 MX4 conversion. So I'm going to start by showing you the two different triple trees for the KTM forks. Right here in the center, I do have an air fork setup. This is typically on a 13 and up 85 SX, and you can notice it by the two ridges right here on the front. These two ridges are for the front fender mounting points, and that is different on the air fork. If you look on the spring fork triple clamp, this one is a spring fork. You can see there's no ridges on the front. Virtually the same clamping diameters, but this does not have any ridges for the front fender. Going forward from that, quick layout of how you would be installing the 85 MS conversion. So on the right here, we're going to have Talaria, and on the left, we're going to have Saron. I'm going to quickly run through the orientation for you. So if you're starting, I always like to start with putting my bearing and my dust shield on the actual lower triple tree and stem. I feel like that's the easiest. So I always start with dust seal for the lower and then the bearing. These will need to be either heated or freeze, depending on how you want to do it to help get these on the stem, but they will need driven onto the stem. You can see here the correct install. It is fully bottomed out to the lower stem with the bottom washer, and then the bottom bearing right on top is adequately greased, and this would be ready for install. So once you have those two on, this lower portion would be ready for install. This is the same on both Talaria and Saron. So both these two pieces would be your first step. We'll put those to the side for now. So once we have our lower dust shield and bearing onto our actual stem, the next step would be to install the race or the race and cup into the actual frame. So that would be your next step. So this side we have the Saron setup. The Saron gets a bottom cup because it is a different frame configuration than the Talaria. Talaria only gets a bearing brace. These will fit directly into the lower of the frame for the Talaria, and that is where your bottom bearing will ride on. So this would be tapped up into the lower frame on the Talaria. Same thing with this part. This will be tapped into the lower frame on the Saron, but this one has a little bit of an offset with your race pre-installed. Those will once again be directly below your bottom bearing as you're installing it. Imagine this is your frame, the lower portion of your frame. After you seated it, your triple clamp will come up and then be seated as such. That is going to take the complete process of the lower out of the way. So now we have our lower race in our frame, or our lower cup in our frame. We have our bearing and our dust seal on the stem. We're ready to move on to the top. Top is very similar with the install process for both. You have your top cup, right side being Talaria, left side being Saron. Saron we did upgrade due to the little bit of the weak nets we're seeing on these Sarons. So it is double step. So you got two added grab points and it drives down deeper into the frame. Nice upgrade for anybody that has a partially stretched net. This should help prevent it getting worse. Talaria side is much simpler, but they do have a little bit stronger frame. These will be installed directly into the top portion of the frame. If my hand was the frame, you'd be driving it directly into the top portion. Race is already installed on both, so that'll be ready to go. So once you fully seat that into your frame, now you would be sliding through your lower stem, which is going to have your race already in the frame. That'll meet up. Then your top cup will already be in the frame, so it'll be sitting there like such. And that's when we would move on to your top bearing, which you should have fully greased and packed. Your top dust seal and washer, which will go directly on top. Your top triple clamp. And then your top nut. Obviously, torque everything to spec, but this is the install configuration of the setup. So that is a quick run through of installing it in the correct orientation. The next thing I'm going to move on to is I'm going to actually demonstrate some more of the tips and tricks for installing the kit. If you're working with a Saron or a Talaria, getting those stock cups or those stock bearing races out of the frame is a little bit of a challenge. Best thing I can advise is a heat gun to the frame, slowly heat it up, and you should be able to get enough on there once you have a nice warm frame. Obviously don't go berserk and start fading all your powder coat or your anodizing, but get it nice and warm, and then you should be able to take a chisel and tap it right on the edge of the race, and it'll drop out. If you have access to a welder, welders are great. You can just weld a bead on the inside of the race and then tap it straight there. Those are the easiest, and it also heats that whole neck up a little bit, just even doing it tack. So that is a really good way as well. If you are not very good at working with tools or working with your hands, some people aren't. I'm pretty good at making stuff happen, but other guys aren't. There are some really, really good race removal tools, race driver tools, as well as seating tools to seat the bearing on the lower stem. You can find those typically at shops like Motion Pro sells them. You can find them on Amazon in various sizes, typically like neck bearing install kits. You can find them at most power sports dealerships. They may not have them in stock, but you can order them. But those are really helpful. They typically have teeth that grab onto the race and expand and then allow you to pull them out. As far as putting the whole configuration of the kit together, once you have the bearing race out, a couple of tips and tricks that I like to do is, one of the things is I will actually use a stock Sur-on wheel spacer. That is the perfect diameter to slide over this stem and not hit your threads. The nice part about this is when I'm driving down these lower bearing and this lower dust shield, I can flip this upside down, stick this on there, loosely set this ring to catch on my vise or any sort of tubing and vise that in, and then I can lightly tap on the bottom, and I know I'm not hitting any of the actual cage, which you can see here. I'm only hitting the inside. That is the most important part about driving these bearings down, is you do not want to be sitting this outside cage. The only thing you want to be doing is hitting the inside race. So you can see we have a nice little gap here. That shows me that I'm only hitting that inside race, but not this outside cage, and it's okay to make contact there. For greasing your bearings, I like to grease mine before everything, before I even put it actually on the stem. The way I like to grease my bearings is I take a big old glob of grease out of a grease, lob it straight on my hand. When I'm packing my bearings, I'm basically hooking it like this and pulling it down throughout my hand to pack that grease in. You're not really trying to grease these outside rollers. Doesn't mean a whole lot to get grease on the outside. You're trying to pack it in to get grease all the way through the inside and all the way out the backside, and that'll tell you it's fully greased up. You can see around this one, it is very greased up. We have adequate grease all the way throughout the back. The outside doesn't look like there's a bunch, but throughout the inside and out the bottom, we have adequate grease, which is where we need it. A light film on the outside is really all you need. That is how I like to grease my bearings. As far as continuing with the install, we've got this seated on there now. We've used, let's say, a wheel spacer, some sort of PVC pipe, anything that has that correct ID to get that driven down, or we use the proper tool, which can be found by like Motion Pro or on Amazon, or we'll link it also down below so that we can find it easily. So once that's driven on, first step of the process is done. You got that stepped on there, you've got that greased up, froze your stem so that way it's an easy press. Sometimes I like to minorly heat my bearing to just expand it a little bit, so that makes it a nice easy press where you really only have to tap it a couple of times. Moving on to the next step, going back to getting the upper and lower cups into the frame. If I was working on my upper and lower cups, what I typically like to do is throw these in the freezers for a couple minutes. It's going to help to just compact them a little bit. 20-30 minutes is usually enough for anything freezing wise. You just need a temperature difference. Then I like to heat my Sur-on or my Teleria frame a little bit just to expand that. Once that's done, you shouldn't have to fight these too much. I typically like to just lightly tap them up or use a all thread. All thread is just a long threaded rod. You can trim it down, put 2 washers on the end and 2 nuts, and then you just tighten that down. And it should press these nice and snug into the frame. And once that is pressed in and flush to that frame bottom out, those are good to go. After that, it's really, really simple. Pack your top bearing, slide your top bearing on, slide your top washer on, put your top triple clamp on, and torque it to spec. Get your correct bearing preload, and you are ready to rock and roll. Any sort of issues you're having as far as pressing these on, make sure they are lined up. If you have one lip hanging off to the side, like this, when you're trying to put it in, it's going to be much harder. If you make sure you keep that straight, it should go down nice and easy. That is about all I can really tell you guys about this install. It's pretty easy if you worked on most, dirt bikes in the past. If you have not, it might be a little challenging as they are press fits on them. but that is something that is a good skill to have. As soon as you learn that, all your neck jobs are going to be pretty easy as long as they're not rusted. That is another tip and trick though that I can get into is if your stem has a bunch of burrs and rust on it, clean it up. It's going to make everything slide much nicer. I can show you this one for an example. This stem we don't use anymore, but it's very, very burred up. This bearing slides on no problem on this stem. Goes all the way down, all the way out, catches real nice. This one, good luck. It's a very burred up stem. That's why this is no longer used, and that is going to cause us all sort of issues getting that bearing off and on. If you guys have any questions, you would like to see more, maybe an install on a bike, let us know. We're here to help, and we'll catch you soon.